It's the Misfits.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Happy Sunday. We are back with a live episode recording on Twitch. We had to move it from yesterday due to some last minute things that came up on my end, but luckily Stefon is always gracious and willing to reschedule, and so we had to push it back a day. But we hope you are still here and ready to jump into a conversation that we didn't think would produce any kind of real controversy, but it might, based off a conversation that happened last night. So we'll see what happens here. So some of you should recognize, everybody should recognize, just in general, everybody should recognize Stefon Napier, poet, new monastic. He is a spiritual director in training, a poet, an outdoorsman, and one of those guests that we have that literally has an open seat when Misfits is on air. And this is one of those discussions that he came to me saying, we're having this, schedule it. So Stefon, welcome back. Thanks for delaying a day and then dealing with the hassle that is live streaming with me, as it took us a while for us both to be able to hear the other one. But welcome in. It's been a while. Actually, I don't know when was the last time you were on. Has it been a full year, or was it just this past spring? I don't remember. They're all blurring together.
I feel like I may have been on this year, like way earlier in the year. This has been a really long year.
Yes.
So yeah, but we could be closing in on a year. If I didn't record anything with you this spring, like early January, February, I feel like I did, but I could be. I
don't remember. It's all blurring together.
But
I know you were on. We've talked about we've talked about the concept of enemies.
Yes.
We have talked about new monasticism.
Yes.
We've talked about Appalachia. Yeah. I believe there were one or two other conversations that we at least were supposed to have that maybe didn't because one or both of us got sick. And all sorts of different other things that have gone on. But you've been on quite a bit. You and I talk quite a bit. And this is one that you selected for me, even though it's one that was going to happen eventually at some point within the Misfits, sphere of all the different stuff we're doing. You approached me with this idea of talking about love as the response, and specifically as the response to nationalism, Christian nationalism specifically, but nationalism as a whole, realistically, is what we're talking about as the kind of the target audience here for why this is the response. Now, we also said off air that we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with what it is that we are actually talking about, because the unfortunate thing, well, we'll start with the fortunate thing. The fortunate thing is that more and more people are finally waking up to the fact that the stuff that we've been warning people about for a decade is actually a real thing and not an internet trend in nationalism. The unfortunate thing is that as people have been waking up to this reality, there have been a lot of, there's been, we'll call it weaponization. Would you say that would be a good word for it? A weaponization of how they are identifying what Christian nationalism is. People are using it to dismiss all of Christianity. There are people that are using it to dismiss all of a certain side of politics. There are certain people that are using it as a weapon to dismiss anybody that they think is different than them in terms of any kind of ideological setting. But that's not what we're wanting to do. So we have defined it multiple times over the past 5 seasons of Misfits. And we want to make sure that we start off today defining what it is that we actually are referring to again. So this here on the screen is the definition we typically use for nationalism. This is coming out of the Oxford English Dictionary. Is the identification with one's own nation in support of for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of others, specifically other nations. Christian nationalism, then, would be a Christianizing of this idea. So this would be the identification with one's own nation, support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations, with Jesus paint on it. That's what we're dealing with here, because the reality is that nationalism is counter to Christianity. We talk about this all the time. All we have to do is look at Philippians chapter 2 to be able to say that, because Philippians chapter 2 tells us that we should consider the interests and needs of others as higher than our own. Meanwhile, nationalism says we're supposed to keep our own interests and needs at the highest priority, even to the detriment of other people. They cannot fit together. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, this is the definition that we are dealing with. So this is not something where all Christians follow this. This is not even something where everybody that currently is trying to claim themselves to be a Christian nationalist even would necessarily identify with. But this is the actual definition of what Christian nationalism is. Now, with all of that framework in mind, the thesis for today, at least, is actually super simple. And that is that the best response to this kind of ideology is to love our neighbor. So, Stefon, I'll let you start preaching, and we'll see if you even need me to jump in at all, because you may just preach us through the next hour without even thinking about it. Walk us through this. Why is that the response?
Well, Angie, first, thanks for being here. I appreciate that. It's great to be back on Ministry Misfits, and had a lot of wonderful things happen to me in the time that I've been absent from the show. So once again, just great to be back here. As it relates to Christian nationalism, so we have a lot of people in common that we know. We have a lot of people that are definitely anti-Christian nationalists. We see them all the time. They're online. They're everywhere. Threads, Twitter. You've got people like Andrew DeYoung. You've got Zach Lambert, Tim Whitaker, for example. There are a lot of people that are kind of fighting this battle. But the one thing that concerns me, or has concerned me in the past couple of months, has been, it doesn't appear that a lot of people are fighting this back with the gospel. We're not fighting it we're fighting it with the sword. So Christian nationalism is a proponent of the sword. But people that I know, people that maybe even and others in general, that while they may be anti-Christian nationalism, they are also picking up the sword in response. And that's concerning for me, because when you have that kind of a thing emerge, I realize that we're not really getting anywhere. I think that we've seen this buildup of Christian nationalism over the last couple of years. And sometimes it kind of summers down. I think in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, it kind of skyrocketed even more. I would say Christian nationalism has basically become a subscription service, if you will. It is something that people have found our identity in. Just everything about their whole being kind of wrapped around this idea of Christianity having this kind of political control, Christianity ruling in our country. And when I look at the responses online to it, while I am generally supportive of anyone that is counter to Christian nationalism, I'm realizing that people aren't fighting this back with the gospel. They are. It's kind of the same stuff that's just being regurgitated day in and day out. Like, we understand that Christian nationalism isn't good for anyone. We understand where it comes from. We understand the negativity that surrounds it. So the question that I've been asking, to myself and to the people in my circle, and even, on the internet to some extent, is, okay, so what are we going to do moving forward? And I find myself asking that question a lot. I asked that question a lot in the wake of deconstruction. I said, okay, we understand that, the evangelical church is not what maybe it should be or what it could be, or church in general is not what it could be. How are we moving forward? And I asked that question again as it relates to dealing with Christian nationalism. How do we move forward with that? And so for me, that starts very hyperlocal. That starts with your neighbor. That starts with your block. And the reason I say that is because there are so many people that are really unaffected by Christian nationalism that we're still called to reach out to, that we're still called to share our lives with. The other day, I have a friend of mine who's clearing out some land, just bought this beautiful acreage out near the border of Pennsylvania. And he's somebody I've kind of been hanging out with for the last maybe year and a half. And we've had conversations a little bit about like church and like, what's that look like? But he never talks about Christian nationalism. I don't think he even knows what it is. And so while I'm sitting there watching him on his bulldozer, he's essentially playing on this big bulldozer. I'm sitting there saying, man, like, I wonder if we are being distracted from our true mission. And again, that is to share our lives as people, to exemplify Jesus in the way we live our lives. And I think that we can get so caught up in fighting Christian nationalism that we forget that essentially doing the work that Jesus has called us to do is the fight against Christian nationalism. And I know that doesn't sound flashy. It doesn't sound like something that is going to overcome, the things that we're facing. But you have to also understand that that's kind of where Christian nationalism lays its bed. Like, if you think about it, when you talk to people that subscribe to that theory, you just listen to people in online forums, they get very uncomfortable. They get very dismissive of anything surrounding Jesus. Jesus almost appears to be a sort of weakness. They don't really mention him. Sometimes a lot of times they'll go back to the Old Testament. I had a gentleman the other day. We were having a conversation about, the sword. And he says, Christians are supposed to bring. I'm like, no, first of all, that's Jesus said that. He never told us to bring a sword. And so I pointed out, because he was talking about Christian persecution. And I gave him an actual example. I said, well, what about Stephen? Let's talk about Stephen for a second. And I said, Stephen, in his response to his persecutors, he didn't ask God to strike him down. He didn't pick up a sword. He prayed for them. He wanted God to forgive them. His response to that was telling me that Stephen spoke with a sword in his mouth. And I'm like, I don't know how you grab a sword in your mouth from God forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. But it happened. And that is the bed that I do not want those of us that see Christian nationalism for what it is. I don't want us to lay in that same bed. I don't want us to become that. And I feel like there are a lot of people that in their frustration, in their anger over this, they are beginning to see Jesus and the gospel as a weakness themselves. And again, these are people that, we're working alongside right now. And that's just something that we got to be careful. We got to watch. And we've just got to take good steps to make sure that we are putting into plan actions that are really going to show everyone something different. And so what does that look like? When I say, well, how do we move forward? How do we make sure that we don't, look at the teachings of Jesus as secondary in the fight against Christian nationalism. Well, we acted out, we carried out. I've been reading a couple of things over the last few months. Most recently, I'm dwelling in a book called, I think it's called The Altar in the World. It's by a woman named Barbara Brown Taylor. And in it, she kind of talks about like really the church as being beyond the walls that we typically associate with the church. She talks about it in terms of like, she was at a tidal pool in Hawaii, and like for her, that was her altar. Sometimes, I think she talked about a church in Dublin, Ohio. Like for her, sometimes that was an altar. Like really this expanded definition of what church looks like. And in that, I said, well, this is where we've got a foothold, because much of Christian nationalism really, really still is tied very strongly to the evangelical church.
Mm-hmm.
And the evangelical church is very much about attendance-based faith. And that is something that people in the emerging space, church, people in the new monastic space, such as myself, we've kind of moved on from the idea of church as something to attend, and church is something you carry around in your body. Church is something more vulnerable. Church is something that's happening daily. It's a spiritual practice as opposed to something that you attend.
Spoiler alert, that's an upcoming conversation with Stefon we're going to be having as well.
So when I look at this, I say, guys, like, let's continue to fight the good fight, but let's do it the right way. I'm not here to chastise anyone, to call anyone out, but I've seen it even from some of our more prominent voices, even some of the names I mentioned. There are times where I'm like, man, I get what you guys are doing here, but I'm not sure at this point if this is just for clicks, if this is just to heighten your own popularity. But the gospel, that's the way we do this. This is we fight this by being the hands and feet of Jesus. And we do that. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and this is something that I told you, this is something that I've been having this conversation with other people about. So is that I think, and this is why I started us off the way I did as well, is that a lot of what I have seen over the past 10 months or so is the response to nationalism now becoming policy has been to respond to it as a political movement. It's very much about, we see arguments from people about the unconstitutionality of it all. We see people talking about it from almost a wars and rumors of wars type of perspective on it. And I think for a lot of people, and again, this is not, we're not calling anybody out saying you all are doing this wrong. That's not just like everything we do with the Misfits. We're looking at the ideology. We're looking at the methodology. We're not looking at the people. We're looking at what's going on. And a lot of what I have seen is that there is almost a measure of panic and ill preparedness. Mm-hmm. Because I just had this discussion with the Bible study group that we have after church this Sunday. So our pastor's walking through the book of Jeremiah, which I'm loving because Jeremiah and I get along very well because we have a lot of things in common here. But today was specifically out of Jeremiah 25. And one of the things that Jeremiah says in this chapter is this is like the final prophecy in a way of Jeremiah, because the rest of the book is much more of you're in exile, deal with it. How do you deal with it? And this chapter in Jeremiah is one where he's very much of like, we've been warning about this forever. Jeremiah's like, I've been warning about this for 23, 33, whatever it is years, and no one was listening. Now you see Nebuchadnezzar marching in. Now is not the time to suddenly say, oh, well, now we need to make this change and this change and this change. No, now the time is for us to figure out how does God expect us to live in the midst of exile? And this is I've been saying this since, last November, December, is that, it's great that suddenly people are waking up to the fact that this nationalism thing that they kept telling us was a fake and a fraud and an internet trend all this time. Now suddenly people realize it's real. But now is not the time to fight it ideologically. Like that has passed. Like the time to do that was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now is the time for us to now say, okay, it's here. So how does God want us to respond? And a lot of what I have seen from a lot of voices that had been kind of pushing back against nationalism faithfully for the past few years seem to be ill prepared for the shift of now we are in a Jeremiah 25 type of moment of the time to push back against it and convince people it's a bad thing is past. Now it is, how do we live in the world that has been created? And it's largely, and that's part of why, the immediate response from people is, well, it's politics, and this is a government movement and everything else. The reality is that at the heart of Christian nationalism, we are dealing with a theological issue. We are dealing with an issue of a misunderstanding of who Jesus is, a misunderstanding of who the church is, and a misunderstanding of what our role as the church is if we have declared that Jesus is Lord.
And probably a grave misunderstanding of what church is and looks like.
Right. And so the response now should be, how do we be the church? Not how do we take back our government? And that's a large thing that I've seen. It's part of what you were saying as well, is that unfortunately now many people are trying to defeat nationalism by becoming the very problem that nationalism presents. We're using the methods of empire to fight the empire, when Jesus already told us what we're supposed to do. He's laid it out for us very clearly, and that is our call is now to love our neighbor, to view those that call us enemy as neighbor and love them as well, to move the gospel forward even when those that have been telling us all along they are proclaiming the gospel are suddenly now ready to declare the empire as the gospel. That's the thing that I've seen a lot of the past, since Charlie Kirk, is that a lot of people that had always kind of, at least in theory, been saying, oh, Christian nationalism bad, Christian nationalism bad, Christian nationalism bad, are now gladly taking on the title of Christian Nationalist because they think that that's what it's supposed to look like. And I like the way that you introed this as well, of the idea of, because they view that as martyrdom now. And that's something that should be something they want to look at. But they've now divorced what the church's role is and what the gospel's role is, just to get something that they think they're supposed to be running after.
But Andrew, what I've realized is that the folks that are knee deep in Christian nationalism and the people that are not knee deep in it still came from the same place. There are a lot of people, myself included, that came from the evangelical church. And I'm going to go back quick to this idea of attendance, because I think it's important here.
Yeah.
Because at least for me, in the space I was at, I kind of got out of that space about 3.5 years ago. When you're merely told to attend and your action is very limited, this is why we have the response that we have, because people are not used to acting out their faith.
Yeah.
Because so much of what we learned and what we did, at least ministry wise, like, for example, I was involved a little bit 2022 through 2023, I was involved in like media ministry, and we know what kinds of ministries exist at church. You've got all sorts of ministries, from kids ministries down to like serving at the front doors, the greeters, that kind of things. But the thing is, we've done so much that to a degree that, and it's not to say that those things are bad, but we've told ourselves this is us serving the kingdom. We've said, me doing this is holy, and me coming in, setting up for church, making sure that the audio is working perfectly, and I feel I'm not calling anybody out here, but making sure that, pastor's mics is working, the cameras are all set up correctly, or hey, I'm coming and I'm setting up and I'm making sure that there's coffee ready to go, there's fresh coffee for guests and all that. I think that people have done that for so long that we've sat down and said, this is the work of the kingdom, this is holy. But really, I think it's been more of a comfort thing. A lot of the ministries that you see around churches today don't really necessarily make you uncomfortable unless you're like me, you're an introvert, and they're like, hey, why don't you go greet people? Then that might be a little uncomfortable, but they don't really address any of the issues that we're facing. And I think that is why I'm seeing people respond to this through maybe policy or, again, just activism, as opposed to the way of Jesus, the way of the gospel, because for so long, so many of us really weren't trained to, really go out. There was more of, you have to go out and bring people back in. So now you're indoctrinated into this, and now you do not know. And now when we're confronted with something that's serious, we have no idea how to respond to it, because we weren't really told to act out the gospel in the way that they should be acted out.
It's Roman model evangelism. So I don't know, Stefon. I don't think I've done any with you. That have you ever looked at or heard us talk about or anything about the Celtic versus Roman evangelism?
I may have heard it somewhere else, but go ahead and talk about it anyway.
That's okay. I hope you have, because I love that. This is one of my favorites, because this was one of the first places where my eyes were open to the fact that, one, God had made me a little bit different than the way that the evangelical church was telling me I was supposed to be. Because this is something where what you described and what most churches, even not even just evangelical, we're talking most churches in America, work off of a Roman model. Unless you are talking about the Black church has never been a Roman model. Most churches in America are a Roman model versus a Celtic model. The Celtic model is one where the church exists for the community. And so you go into the community, become part of the community, serve the community, and do church within the community. The Roman model is one where you go into a community and build up your fort, invite people into the fort, and say, if you come into the fort, you must assimilate into Roman society.
Mm-hmm.
There are two polar opposites in terms of models of evangelism. One is very much, you must become like us. The other one is, we want to become like you. One is both of them have their place, and both of them can work if the same mindset is there of that it's about serving the community. Most of the time, though, Roman model evangelism ends up without serving the community and instead becoming a separate community within a community. And that's a big issue. Now, I want to jump onto one of the other things you say, because you're talking about the fact that it's very much, we've been told that attendance matters. That kind of idea within evangelicalism. Because I think that does play another role in the current hot topic message that we're getting. So we wrote this article a few weeks ago dealing with the topic of revival. Because unfortunately, we have seen quite a lot of people making statements like, the revival that I've been praying for is finally happening. It's finally here. There's revival in the land. And it's mostly dealing with the Turning Point USA numbers going up. Because they're saying if there's this many people joining what is calling themselves a Christian organization, then that means all these people want God, and so that means that they're running after God, which means we have revival in the land.
There's a lot of assumptions there.
There's a lot of assumptions there, but that's the assumptions that are being made. The article we wrote, though, wants us to look at it a little bit differently, and this is part of what the overall conversation that we're having is. So this is what we found when we look at what a quote-unquote revival, because revival is not found in Scripture anywhere. What we found with things that people would associate as a revival, which would be, a cultural or community turnaround back to God. So things like what we see in Nineveh, the reform of the nation when Josiah finds the law, Moses rededicating the people, all these kind of things where we would say that these would be quote unquote revivals. This is what is typically associated with it, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament. There's a new emphasis on the community. The individualized ideas and interests of the people start to fade away for the community. Idols are removed. Just a blanket statement, the idols are gone. The poor are provided for. The hungry are fed. The sick are healed. Oppression is resisted. Peace becomes the mission. Hierarchies are humbled. And then after all of that has taken place, then you see growth in terms of numbers, size, mission, all of that kind of stuff. The church grows or the community grows, whichever it might be. It grows after all of these other things have taken place. The majority of that list, even though it's coming from both testaments, come out of also Jesus's mission statement in Luke chapter 4. It's good news to the poor. It's freedom to the captives. The blind see, the lame walk, and there's freedom. That is what is associated with revival throughout both testaments of Scripture, is that it's not based off of how many people are signing your pledge. It's based off of how many people are being served by the hands and feet of God.
So I want to use a different R word.
Ooh, fun.
Think about all those events that you just described from Scripture. I wouldn't call those revivals. I would call those reconciliations.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Reconciling people. There were so many times where the Israelites, during their time in the desert, had to be reconciled to God. There were so many times that the nation of Israel in Scripture, in Chronicles, Judges, King, had to be reconciled to God. And I think that's what we need more. We don't need revivals in this country. We need reconciliations. It's one of the reasons why, probably the main reason why I became a part of the new monastic movement, is because I think it cares about that reconciliation piece. Because the thing about reconciliation is that it's not trying to assimilate you necessarily into a way of thinking. It's trying to reconcile you back to God. And it's not just people, it's all things. It's the way we care for the land, the way we do church. Like, I believe there is a reconciliation of the church back into God that is sorely needed. Mm-hmm. I didn't know much about revivals. I'd hear them ever so often. I think revivals, that word has just become just a jargon. It's just something that people, I think, say. I've heard it since I officially became a Christian back in 2016. That's what people use it for. They get excited because people show up and people have a moment, and we take that one moment and we spread out. Because everyone's excited. It seems cool. It seems shock value is not the word I want to use, but we take these climatic moments and we make more of them than we need to be. We're looking for a feeling of some kind. You see this all the time, but I went to a church when I was in Iowa. I briefly attended a church where they use a lot of smoke. And it felt like they were trying to cry. Like while they talk, like they were trying to get their voice to crack. And I was like,
well, if you put enough smoke in the room, your eyes are gonna water. So I mean,
like you don't need to do that. It felt very like insincere. They're trying to create an experience, and that's what we get captivated by as experiences. And I'm like, no, like you have to understand that sometimes, first of all, the work of the gospel is slow. I was just reading something last night. I was talking about one of the things you got to look at about Jesus is that he walked everywhere, and in walking, he was able to really see people. Yeah, and they were able to see him in it. I think it's the book I was just talked about that I was reading. And one of the things it said too is that like a lot of times that Jesus didn't have a particular destination in mind, the way so many churches have these programs and these themes set up. A lot of churches are using the whole next steps thing. So you even got pastors of next steps. Like, and I'm like, and all that really means is they're in charge of helping people sign up. It's a nice way of saying, hey, I'm just in charge of making you sign the sheet. But Jesus was the destination. Like people came, like he became the destination. And in that slow walk, in that seemingly just walk of where he's not really going any particular where, he's able to focus and spend time with people. But we live in a capitalist society that focuses so much on results and production. So we are, I'm going to butcher this, so please correct me, because I think there were two Lamechs in scripture, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is where there was one that
there was at least two, yeah.
There was one that focused on creation. Not creation, creating things, producing things. I forgot. It's either Lamech or Laban. I forgot which one it was. I think it's Lamech. We are very much that kind where we're all about production and producing. And the gospel is not like that. And so what I think this is kind of morphing into, we've got Christian nationalism, because of how we've done church. We see the response to Christian nationalism because of how we've done church. So maybe the answer to both, or to how we deal with both, is to really taking those steps to changing how we're doing church, really expanding upon it, as opposed to this very linear, this very production-based thing that we have now. I think maybe that's the answer to this whole thing. I definitely believe that we need to get more people, that concept I always talk about. I'm going to repeat it so much. Again, walking around carrying church in your body, being a monastery onto yourself and to others, like doing those little things. Like I'm in the process of becoming a spiritual director, because I think that we honestly need spiritual directors on every block. More than one of them, people that can walk with people. Because the thing about spiritual direction is not about fixing anybody. It's not about getting people to a certain point. It's just walking with them as they process their lives. It's being an intermediary between them and God, because at the end of the day, God's the true spiritual director. And so for me, like, I think that when we talk about Christian nationalism, what we really need to be talking about is how we are doing church, especially the people that are anti-Christian nationalism. How are we doing church? What are we doing daily? What are our spiritual practices that we're doing daily that are showing people something different? Because again, there's a lot of people in this country that Christian nationalism they don't really know what that is. They don't care about that. They're trying to figure out their lives. Like we definitely don't want them to get attracted to Christian nationalism. That's another element, like how much of church is about attraction to something. We try to attract people in, and we're like, hey, we're going to build church. We're going to build a church that's got a really strong kids ministry, because that way more people that are more young people or more parents, people with kids, will come in. Like, there's something wrong with the way we've been doing church, and it's contributed to this problem. And now we're at this crossroads, as you pointed out, where people have been talking about this and pointing out that this has been coming for years, and no one did anything about it, and very few people were doing anything about it. And now that it's here, it's probably not going away. We may not see anything that resembles a victory in this.
Yeah.
And we just need to make sure that we're checking ourselves and that we're on guard, and we're saying, you know what, we're going to continue to do the work of the kingdom. And that requires us to really learn to be the hands and feet, to really use our hands.
I want to jump on something you just said there.
Sure.
Is you said, we may not see a victory here. That is, I think, also it's another big proponent of how, one, we've gotten church wrong, and two, part of where I think a lot of people fall short when it comes to trying to figure out what to do about all of this is that, again, we live in a capitalist society where we have to measure success, and that need to be the victor, for there to be something that we have in our heads as far as this is what the goal is. This is the championship, this is the championship reign right here. That's really hard to get rid of. That desire is really hard to get rid of. And I think we need to go back to what you said like 20 minutes ago. Or no, I guess it wasn't that long. 10 minutes ago, when you were talking about Jesus' ministry, is that it's the same destination that Jesus' time was, where he was the destination. That should be the victory point for us as well. Is that if Jesus is the victory, it's reachable. It's just not going to look like what we think it should look like. It's not going to look like a return to pre-2015 America. It's not going to be a return to 1950s America. It's not going to be a return to any of this kind of stuff. It's going to have to be a return to the church being the church, rather than whatever this little hodgepodge of a thing we have right now actually is. And that, this was something you did say at the beginning, and we've said it a few times on here as well, is that the thing that has been, and this is not just Christian nationalism either. These are not just Christian nationalists I'm talking about here. This is coming from a lot of different areas of Christianity in general, of this idea of when we talk about the teachings, the words of Jesus, the person of Jesus, the image that Scripture paints for us of Jesus, words that come back to describe what we have put out are things like impractical, theoretical. It looks good on paper. It doesn't work for the world we live in. All of these kind of things are what keep coming back when we start to talk about this kind of stuff. And it has put us in a very, I would say, maybe dangerous position when we have a combination of a church culture that is solely Roman model evangelism, of you must come in and assimilate to us, while also pushing a Jesus that many of us are saying is not practical today. Because what is that actually going to produce? It's not going to produce the Jesus of Scripture. It's going to produce another cultural caricature of Jesus, just like we already have. Because our goal is in the wrong spot. Our eyes are in the wrong spot, and our methods are in the wrong spot. That's going to put us right back where we were 20, 50, 100, 400 years ago. No matter which one of the stopping point posts you want to go to, we are at the same point each time of where we have been pushing for a different Jesus than we have in Scripture. And the church not recognizing it. And so when they finally do recognize it, we push back with something that is still not Jesus. We're pushing back with something that is just a different version of what we are pushing back against.
I'm going to say something that is both comforting and probably scary.
It's amazing how often those two things go together.
So the comforting thing is that Jesus himself went through all of this.
Right.
This moment that we're going through right now, there were people, why was Jesus killed? Well, at the end of the day, like he didn't come to fight Rome, and that's what people wanted him to do. He didn't do that. Lost his life because of it. There were people that saw him as a tool, as a weapon, essentially, against the Roman Empire or Roman rule. This is why he clashed so much with some of the religious leaders, is because of this very thing. Around that time before, and I think after him, you had, uprisings that occurred in that region. And so you had some sects that were trying to kind of pacify like Rome, like they were trying to find a way to kind of get along with the Roman rule. Mm-hmm. And they saw Jesus as a rebel that was this is gonna really disrupt his function. We got to get rid of this guy. So that's the comforting part, is that he went through this, essentially the same thing, especially when he began talking about the Gentiles. Mm-hmm. He reveals like, hey, my ministry is also the Gentiles. That really set a lot of people off. People were not happy with that idea, in the same way that people aren't happy with the idea of the immigrant coming into this country. It's kind of that same thing. The scary part of this is that people very well may lose their life.
Yeah.
In this. Some technically already have. I think that when I look at it, I don't really see any other way around this. Again, we are going to have to really learn to be present, which is what I think Jesus is all about, is about presence. He's not about retaliation. He's not about fighting back. And because of that, because of being vulnerable like that, because of being willing to make that sacrifice, many of us, or some of us, are going to definitely lose our life in this process. I think we're going to see maybe even some betrayal of sorts, because there are going to be people that hear us talking about things like this, and they're frustrated because they're like, no, we got to pick up the sword. We got to fight Christian nationalism. I'm like, again, no, that's not what we're here to do. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if I have to defend people, I will. Just obviously, I don't mean to tell anyone that you shouldn't protect your families. Like, obviously, when it comes down to things like that, I think there is a path where, yeah, you need to make sure that you're doing that. But ultimately, if we're being real about where this is, and we're being real about the idea that the victory that many of us want is not the victory that we're actually going to get, mm-hmm. It's going to cost us our lives. And that is a scary thought. But if we're students of history, if we're any kind of a student of the scripture, even an elementary one, that's ultimately what happened to many people. Again, the apostles are examples of this, man. So I could see a scenario in which, even within this anti-Christian nationalism movement, a lot more factions begin to appear. You've got the people that are very, very radical that say, we've got to destroy this. We've got to fight Turning Point USA. We have to go to war here. And then there'll be other factions. I believe that new monastics will be among them, where we're saying, hey, like, we're going to not get distracted by Christian nationalism, because to me, ultimately Christian nationalism is really just one great distraction. To be honest, the people in Christian nationalism aren't my enemies.
Right.
I know this is not popular to say in this time and period, but the devil, Satan, to me is still the true enemy out there. I think that we are being distracted by this, and this is kind of on brand for what the devil does. You give people something disguised as what they think is right, but it truly isn't right. And I think that's what Christian nationalism has become.
That's been that, and that again, that's something that we see in Scripture as well. I mean, you and I, this is one of the conversations you and I have had before, but this is something that people don't. I don't remember when this conversation started. This was one that when Weird Christian Twitter was in its prime. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, Stefon knows what I'm talking about because he was there back in the the glory days of Christian Twitter. There was we joked about the liturgical calendar for Twitter, where there were just these things that kept on popping up on Christian Twitter all the time, different discussions and things like that. Well, one of the things that popped up towards the end that was actually a very good discussion was the fact that Christians need to be more careful about how we talked about Pharisees in Scripture, because a lot of people painted them as the enemy, didn't actually understand who they were or what they were doing. Same thing with the Sadducees, same thing, everything else. And this is something that I think is important for us now as a church to see as well, because it goes along with what we're talking about here as far as how we're supposed to respond. The Sadducees very much would be what we, in terms of goals and methods to get to those goals, would be very similar to what we are dealing with Christian nationalists right now. They want to have peace with the government, comfort with the government. And so they modified their religious perspectives to fit with what Rome was teaching. They assimilated to Rome is, I guess, the easiest way to say it. The Pharisees were the reverse of that. They were anti-nationalists. They were anti-Hellenization. They were anti-Rome. And so that's part of the reason why they preached such very strict standards for the Jews to follow, is they were supposed to stand against Rome. And so part of standing against Rome is to maintain the Judaism, maintain our way of life, maintain. The Sadducees hated Jesus. The Pharisees were on board with Jesus at first and then weren't. And then were anti-Jesus as well. Because Jesus was neither one of those things. He was not a nationalist, and he was also not out there fighting tooth and nail against nationalism and using religion as a weapon to do it. He was instead, to use the words that Stefon had been using this whole time, he was instead walking with the people, healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, delivering good news to the poor, and doing all of that while still calling for freedom from oppression.
And what do you notice about the people when he healed them? Their responses, it felt like they were coming home.
Yeah.
And that's that reconciliation piece. I mean, I think even for I cannot pronounce his name. I'm terrible at pronouncing it. Nicodemus. Yeah, like I think even he, you can see he's like, oh, he's captivated by this. He's like, man, this is like he's experiencing what it's like to be home for the first time ever, and that is all I want people to experience. Really, again, like I'm sometimes on my Facebook. There's a friend of mine. I wouldn't call him necessarily a friend as much as an acquaintance, but I know he was very profoundly affected by Charlie Kirk's death. And I've kind of watched this slow descent that he's been going through. And it's been a little scary. And it sucks because you're seeing people subscribe to a thing and they're misguided. Not my enemy. And I point this person out in particular because this is somebody that I spent some time around. I was around it. This wasn't some random faceless profile on Twitter or
Right.
Threads now, because they're kind of popping up there too. This is somebody I know, and you're watching somebody make this kind of slow descent into this kind of madness, where God is purely logic,
Yeah.
and there's no wonder to any of this anymore. And then again, on the other side of it, I'm watching people that I enjoy following, enjoy reading some of the things that they write about. I'm watching them kind of fall into this same pattern where they are slipping away from, at least in my mind, slipping away from Jesus. And they're saying, like, Jesus isn't enough for them to deal with the situation at hand, but he's got to be. He really has to be, for us to get anywhere in this. Like, when you're following Jesus, you tend to not be in the majority at all. This was, if you look at the big picture, this was basically a rabbi roaming around in the wilderness with people. He wasn't even really at a lot of, he wasn't, trying to take Rome down. He wasn't doing anything like that. He wasn't stirring the people up. He was trying to reconcile people, to himself and the Father. And it's crazy because you see so much today, is so much a reflection of the people that rejected that. People rejecting healing. People so scared at seeing him heal a man possessed by demons that they ask him to leave because they can't deal with it.
Yep.
Like, that's where we're going. We're going towards a place where people begin to reject even healing because it's not comfortable. No one wants to. That's another thing that's gotten lost. Nobody wants to talk about forgiveness. I'm like, okay, so what's going to happen if you fight this with a sword? Let's say that somehow that succeeds and Christian nationalism is defeated. What are you going to do to all the people that you struck?
Yeah.
Where are they going to call home? Because it doesn't sound like you want these people to come home. You essentially want them to wash themselves clean of something. You don't want to walk through things with them. So where are they going to go? So that's another thing that we got to make sure that people are continuing to talk about forgiveness. Because ultimately, I know I still need forgiveness. A lot of things I still need forgiveness for. So for us to get to the point where we're so arrogant as to say that Jesus isn't enough to fight Christian nationalism and that forgiveness isn't really at play here, we're reaching a dangerous spot, and it's something that we really need to zero.
It's something that people can fall into that without realizing it.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing with a lot of this. And this is because I already know there are going to be people saying that this is ridiculous for us to be putting it out because I'm one of those people that is always anti. And, this is something I've had the conversation with quite a few people over the past, however many, I guess it's actually only been a month. With all this is when people were upset about the fact that I was pushing back a little bit from some people that were making statements about Kirk. And they're like, well, you just hated him. You hate everything that Trump stands for. You hate everything about him. And that means that you also hate all Christians. And so I'm your enemy. And you think that I'm your enemy.
Only Sith dealing absolutes.
Yes, there it is. Oh, I wish I still had my soundboard. I need to clip that. Gio, if you're modding at the moment, make sure you clip that for me. But this has been the response. Is like, I don't hate you. I don't hate him. I don't hate the president. I don't consider any of you my enemies. What I have a problem with is when I see Christians, the church, making statements that lead to exactly what you just described, to where Jesus is no longer going to be enough. That's the reason that I respond, is because when you make statements like this man died for his faith, I have to come back and ask you, well, what does that mean about what you're saying our faith is? It's not because this man doesn't, and this is the other thing that I've been saying for a long time. Those that he needs to be mourned. And realistically, Charlie Kirk is a person, because of his profile and everything else, the nation as a whole should be mourning him.
Sure.
An image bearer, a very young image bearer, died. A father died. A husband died. And somebody who proclaimed Jesus as being his personal savior died a very gruesome death no one should have to deal with. The nation should mourn. But we should not use that as a weapon to move our own kingdoms forward that tell us that Jesus is no longer enough. Because the teachings of Jesus are what should be driving the church, not the teachings of a 33-year-old media personality. The teachings of Jesus are what's supposed to be driving us. The person of Jesus is our reward. The person of Jesus is our goal. And so if you start to talk about the goal is a, Mayberry-esque picture of America, a goal is a nation of comfort for Christians because we don't have to deal with persecution. That's one of the arguments that we get a lot of times for Christian nationalism is, well, a nation has to be following a religion one way or the other. So do you want secularism that's going to persecute us, or would you rather it be one of us that's in charge? And it's like, Jesus is no longer enough at that point, because now you're saying that comfort matters more than the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is uncomfortable. That's literally, that's the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Is that everything Jesus calls us to is uncomfortable. It's not supposed to make us want to sit there. It's supposed to make us want to get up and go do it.
I will throw out another Star Wars quote.
Ooh, fun.
Pertaining to the people, some of the people that I'm alongside that, again, are looking for victory over Christian nationalism. Anakin, your need for victory blinds you.
I cannot wait. So, spoiler alert, a lot of what he's been talking about as far as the everyday church being, the church in everyday life, we are going to have a conversation about that. Joe Day is joining us for that conversation, which means that be prepared for a lot of geek culture quotes coming the entire time we are live. But I don't even remember where I was going with that now. Yeah, I've lost it now. That's okay. That's what I was saying. But I think this is ultimately why. It just popped up again, another round of on Threads and Twitter where they want you to say what your most viral tweet ever was, and try to post it again, see what happens. The post that went viral the fastest for me was when I made the statement of Christians don't have enemies, we have neighbors. The reason it went crazy is because everybody, and I literally mean everybody, every possible labeled movement that you can imagine, were very upset with that idea.
Imagine being upset that you only have neighbors.
Right. And, to some of their credit, their reasoning was actually a good reason why they pushed back. They're like, well, why would Jesus tell us to love our enemies if we're not supposed to have any? And the distinction that I pointed out then, and again, this is actually the first conversation that Stefon and I had on a Misfits episode, so you should go back and rewatch that, was us breaking this whole thing down. But the call to love our enemies comes after Jesus identifies who those enemies are. And those enemies are the people that will call us their enemy. It's not us calling them enemy. They consider us their enemy, and it's not even us. They consider Jesus to be their enemy. That is what it means when it says to love your enemies, is to love those that persecute us, right? That's what Matthew 5 says. But the distinction of why we said we have neighbors is that the call of Jesus, according to Luke 10, is that everyone is our neighbor. Right? That's the story of the Good Samaritan, is that everyone is our neighbor, whether they look like us, think like us, are part of somebody that our nation is at war with or thinks are outcasts or anything else. Doesn't matter. Everyone is our neighbor.
It's a beautiful reframing.
And when we see that and start to recognize that everyone is our neighbor, how can we have any enemies? And then we go one step further. We know that everyone is our neighbor because everyone bears the image of God. This is the message of Matthew 25, is that the reason that we should be drawn to care for our neighbors is because when we do that, we are doing it to Jesus himself. How we respond to people is responding to Christ. And we, at least I know within evangelicalism, we haven't been taught this. I don't think really throughout most of American Christian history, we have not been taught to start to view people from those frameworks.
And what a wonderful opportunity to start.
Right. This is the time to start. I mean, that literally is the message here. Too long didn't listen. Now is the time to start. Now is not the time to start pushing back against Christian nationalism to prevent it from taking over. That time was 10 years ago. That time was, at least if you weren't with somebody calling it out 10 years ago, those of you that have been listening to Misfits since season 1, I've been inviting you to push back against it within your churches for 5 years now. That opportunity is gone. Now is the time to start living in the world that has been created by it. And that starts with a renewed mind towards the will of Christ. And what is the will of Christ? That all will be saved. Why is it that all will be saved? Because everyone is our neighbor and everyone bears the image of God. That is the framework we should be approaching people with. There's no room for enemy when you are already viewing people as our neighbor that bears the image of God. And that allows us to be able to push back against some stuff. It allows us to stand with the oppressed. It allows us to stand against injustice. It allows us to push back against enemies in terms of the enemies of the cross, which are systems and powers of the world that promote destruction and gluttony and idolatry. That's a rephrasing of Philippians 3 for those that don't know what I'm talking about. That is what we are supposed to be standing against and pushing back against, not against the people that may claim that title as well. Because the only title that should matter to us is that they are an image bearer that happens to also be my neighbor. That's it. And if that's the case, then we should be able to love them, regardless of if they're going to love us back, regardless of if they're going to persecute us, regardless if they want to ever see us again, no matter what it is. That should be the call. And it's because of the fact that the will of God is the R word that Stefon used earlier, which is the goal of God is reconciliation. The will of God is reconciliation. because Jesus is the one that reconciles and Jesus is the goal. So before we close down, Stefon, what does this actually look like in the world today? What does it actually look like to love our neighbors as a response to all of this stuff? How can we go about doing it?
Well, I think that's such a vast question, really. It's also a creative question. There's so much that one can do. So I will go with what I've tried to begin to do. An example is I play Magic the Gathering, believe it or not, and I've got a few friends. Found a play group recently, and kind of started collecting cards again. Started playing again. We go to somebody's house and we're there, and this past Friday, I was like, you know what? I kind of want to like. I've been thinking about this whole idea. Like, how do I do this like daily church thing? Because I'm talking about it, but talking about it and doing it's one thing. So I said, you know what? Like, so I've been making curry. Curry has been my thing. I love making curry, and so it's such a healing food, and I made quite a bit of it and brought it with me. And again, it wasn't with the intent of, oh, like, hey, I brought you this curry, I brought you this food, like, come learn about Jesus. It was more about, you guys are community to me. You guys are my neighbors. I'm going to share things I have with you. You guys are sharing your home with me. Sometimes I spend the night there because I'm on campus a lot throughout the week. So it's nice to just be off the hill. And that's kind of a place that I've kind of started to dwell in. It looks like being very intentional with the people around you, seeing those spaces where you can share your life, where you can provide aid of some kind. I think that's what it looks like, at least for me. And for other people, it's different. For my friend Nathan, like, a lot of it is going to be about, wilderness retreats, getting people out into the wild, getting people to be contemplative, things like that. Reconciling the land. So that could just be things like, if there's a lot of plants behind me. Started growing things. I was actually able to use some of the holy basil I grew in the curry that I made. There's a plant over here it's still doing its thing. It's gonna have some cayenne peppers coming in soon, but like those little instances of joy, those little things that you can do. And again, they're not what you would associate with production or victory by any means. Those little things that you do, leaning into your true self, and in leaning into your true self, that opens the door for you to be a better neighbor because you understand who you are in God.
Yeah.
That's what kind of that daily process looks like. And again, it's different for everybody else. It's different from you depending on where you are. Again, it might be, Andrew, it might look a little different for you in your life, in your space. Again, I think it's part of being all things to all people. So again, it's a very broad thing. But again, I think for me, where I'll frame it is, it's really being hyper local, being really intentionally looking at your local community and where do you see things? Where can you provide a need? Where can you provide encouragement? Where can you provide joy to somebody's life? Are you doing that with the people around you? Like, I look at those guys in that little magic group. They're kind of a part of that flock for me. They're people I'm like, hey, I'm around these people. I have charge over them in some way. Like, how am I pouring into their lives? It's being intentional about the kind of questions that I ask. I'm like, basic things like, hey, how's your week going? Because sometimes we show up and we're tired from our week. I work in housing and residential life, and that can be very stressful. And sometimes it's easy to forget about what's going on with everyone else. Those are just some of the things I think that people can do daily. And again, that's part of this thing that we call church. And I know I won't go into too much more because I know we're going to talk about
spoiler alerts
later. But the thing is, and again, that doesn't sound dramatic, and it's not supposed to be. Like, I don't think that these things that we're living out are meant to be, they're not meant to be necessarily eye-catching. They're not meant to be.
Right.
Pretty straightforward. It's very simplistic. but very effective way. Again, we live in such a culture of brands and gotcha moments, and that's not what any of this is about. So for me, really leaning into who you are in God, being hyper involved in your local community in some ways, and I mean very local. So again, the people that you see, your coworkers, the people around you, like changing the way you talk to them, the kind of questions you ask, getting to see what their needs are. I think those are I think that's how you do that.
I want to push back a little bit on what you say, because I think there's two things there that I think I'm not disagreeing with you.
Okay.
I just want to reframe it a little bit, because I think that this reframing is part of what we are actually talking about.
Okay.
One of them, the first thing though that needs to be pointed out is that, like you said, it needs to start local and with your local community. And it's because of the very thing he said is that you have to know your community in order to do this stuff. You have to know the people in your community in order to do this stuff. He knows the people he's talking to. He knows when things are wrong. That's how you are able to meet needs, is by knowing the people. That's Celtic evangelism, not Roman evangelism. That was just that part. No notes. Absolutely. Let's go for it. But here's the thing I want to reframe a little bit. One of them was where when you were talking about why you grow this stuff is that it's not something that people would see as, a victory or a production or things like that. And I think that and same thing where you were talking about it's simple and not eye-catching and everything else. In our world today, yeah, it's not really any big deal, and it's not eye-catching, and it's just simplicity. But I think we can reframe it a little bit, because what you were describing there was something where it was not promoting production, is how you said it. But I think we can change it where it's not promoting destruction, it's promoting life.
Okay. I can get behind that. I'm glad you said that.
And it's something where, and again, it's a very simple thing, right? It's just a simple reframing. But for the church, that's part of the goal, right? Is to bring life. Jesus is the life. That he calls himself that. We see that throughout Scripture. This was something in the blog we wrote on Matthew 16. This is a key part of Jesus or Peter's profession of who the Messiah is that Jesus is the living God. And so he is the source and sustainer of life. And so what we are doing is supposed to be promoting life. That we're supposed to be bringing life into our community, because there's a lot of death and destruction and darkness. And if we are bringing life, even in the most simplest of ways, it should actually become eye-catching. This is again coming out of Isaiah 9. The out of darkness comes a great light, right? In the darkest of times, there is light, and light shines and it catches our eye. That is what the big production of Christianity is supposed to be, is that people recognize that there's something different about what we are bringing to the table. And that only comes when Jesus is the source and Jesus is the center. And that is what we are bringing forward, is that we are bringing forward Jesus and nothing else. Now, the other thing that I want to just jump on, and this is where, and again, this is not something that I'm reframing. This is just something I want to make sure that we bring about, because this is something that's come up quite a bit as well over the past year, at least, if not more. People have different callings. People have a different gift. People have different missions that the Spirit chooses. And he chooses it for the edification of the church. That's straight out of 1 Corinthians and Romans, right? The Spirit is the one that selects and chooses the gifts, and he's the one that gives you the message and everything else. And the reason that this is important, there are some people who have been gifted and called to speak directly into the things that we were talking about today, in terms of the nationalism, in terms of all that kind of stuff. but it's not everybody that has been called to do that. And that's where I think a lot of the trouble that we get into with a lot of different things, because it's not just nationalism. Again, this is coming from every type of area, from every side, because again, like you said, we like the production, the showiness. And so we think that if somebody else is making a statement about this, then I have to too, where that may not be where you're called to talk. That may not be where you're called to serve. That may not be where you're called to do anything other than to love the people that are right there. That's it. That may be the only calling you have in this arena, is to love the people that are there. It doesn't mean you still can't learn about it, research it, get into it, all that kind of stuff, as long as it's not distracting you from Jesus at the center. Because if you've been called into something by God, then you should be able to go into that sphere while keeping God at the center and not getting distracted. Because he's the reason you're there in the first place. What causes us to get off track and get off center is when we go into these places and settings and all these different things, thinking that we are doing what God has called us to do, but in the reality is God has not called us there. And when God has not called us there, it's very easy for us to get distracted because our eyes weren't on Jesus in the first place when we entered the room. And that's when we fall victim to us versus them, rather than an image bearer that I get to serve. That's the distinction that doesn't get made a lot of the time. Is that if Jesus is the one that has called you into the field, then you need to go, because you're going to keep Jesus at the center if you recognize that. But if Jesus has not called you, why are you going? Because you're not going to be equipped, you're not going to be focused, and you're not going to be a light bringing life into a dark place. So with all that in mind, Stefon, you got anything you want to end on?
Honestly, no. I think you summed it up pretty well.
Awesome. So he will be back, as he has teased multiple times throughout today's conversation. I don't know yet when, but he will be back eventually. He's going to be coming in to talk about how the church in daily life, I guess is the kind of easiest way to say it. Mm-hmm. Dealing with a lot of the new monastic stuff, dealing with a lot of personal faith stuff, spiritual direction stuff. That's part of the reason why Joe Day wants in on it. He wants to, we have the monastic, we also want to have the mystic, and let both of them geek out about how the Spirit of God is working in their lives together. So they're going to be joining us here in a few weeks, probably, once we figure out schedules and all that good stuff. In the meantime, go check out. Do you still have a writing site up, or a blog or anything?
I'm on Substack, even though I haven't written since July. Again, working in housing and residential life.
Yeah. This is a very busy month for you, I'm sure.
I am on Substack. You can also find me on Threads, Instagram. I don't really do too much on Instagram. I mean, I do post pictures when I'm on Instagram, but generally doesn't really speak to anything that I'm dealing with. Maybe the outdoors. But you can definitely connect with me on Threads there as well, and Substack. I do read things, though, even if I'm not writing as much, and I think some of that's intentional, because making sure that I'm not I don't necessarily always want my words to go out before me. I really want to be in a space where I'm learning to listen more. I think that's the point of a spiritual director. So learn to listen a lot more than I speak. Hopefully.
Awesome. So yeah, go find all that. You should be able, assuming that I updated the links, should be able to find all of that on Stefon's his guest portal on the Misfits website. Those of you that follow through any of the Misfits Outdoors channels also will be able to find a lot of the photography and stuff that he's been doing, because we've been sharing a lot of it through the Outdoors channels as well. So go check out all that good stuff. Those of you that have been watching live on Twitch, make sure you guys check in the comments before we close out so you guys can be entered into the KFM merch drawing. All that good stuff as well. I don't know exactly when we are going to be live next. The weather is not looking like it's going to cooperate for us to be in the kayak quite as much moving forward. And so we are going to be we'll still be doing the fishing stuff. We'll still be doing the outdoor stuff. Just it may look a little bit different because I medically cannot deal with the cold. So we're going to be shifting gears a little bit. We also will have some information soon. Probably Misfits may look a little bit different here moving forward as well. Some of it, unfortunately, due to some of the stuff we were just talking about. And things like that. So make sure you're staying up to date with all that. Go follow us on all the socials at Ministry Misfit, or you can follow the Outdoors channels, which they're all kind of random because people had stolen my username in certain ones. But go find us, all that good stuff. Go check out the website, ministrymisfits.com. And here, Stefon, you're an outdoorsman, so I'm going to plug this now, even though I wasn't planning on it. So with the Misfits Outdoors channel, we also do have a website for it as well. The one of the things we're wanting to do on that website is provide a resource for people to be able to do some of the stuff we talked about today as far as promoting life and promoting growth and things like that, and specifically in the reconciling with nature type of setting. So if you go to the very long URL, because we're in beta testing website, for Misfits Outdoors, you will be able to click on the location database. And what this is a database for people to be able to submit places that they like to go be outdoors. Most of it is water-based because most of the stuff we're doing is fishing, but it's not just for water-based sports. You can go and submit a location to help people be able to find places near them that they can go just do what they enjoy doing, whether it's the fishing, whether it's kayaking. There's also places to put on there for things like dog parks, hiking trails, bird watching, all sorts of different outdoors activities, hiking trails, and providing information that those of us that are parents especially need that these other apps aren't, like, are there public restrooms? Can I buy snacks for the kids? Is there a playground? As well as we also wanted to provide a resource for the ADA community. So things like, is there actually wheelchair ramps? Is it ADA accessible? All of that kind of good stuff as well. So you can check all that out. It's a very long URL. You can find it on the Misfits website. You can find a link for that, as well as in some of the bios. And then also on the KFM site, I believe you can also get linked over to it as well. So go check all that out. Drop us some different locations because we're trying to fill the database up. I think we're up to 30 locations at the moment. Most of them are the places that we streamed from this summer, but not all of them. We got our first out of Ohio one yesterday with a location in Washington State as well. So go check all that out on those sites. Stefon, thanks for rearranging schedules once. We will get you back on the schedule again. And we will see the rest of you when we get there.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/ministrymisfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/ministrymisfits.